You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Wednesday evening, folks. Welcome to my show. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And then come on over to my YouTube channel to watch the video simulcast and join the live chat room going on right now this moment over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And if you would, go check out some of my stuff. Go to my website. Go to ScottAlanRoberts.com. That's Scott with two T's, A-L-A-N, Roberts.com. You can see all the stuff I do. You can see the work that I do. I'm a graphic designer. I'm an illustrator. I am all of those things wrapped up into one. And I do lots of other things. So go over and check out my site. Hire me if you'd like to. So go take a look at my work and my portfolio over there. And you can also go over to my Etsy page. That's etsy.com/shop/son-of-a-patriot. And if you're watching in video, you can see that right here. Son of a Patriot. Oh, there it is. I got to get on the right side of the mic here. Whoa, boom, 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 boom. Son of a Patriot. Now, that's not a clickable link in the video. Sorry. But that's where you go. You can see all the t-shirt designs we do, all the stuff we do like this. Here, like, you know. I think we've got the Think shirt up there as well. Amongst many other things that I've designed for all the different shows and the different politics and things like that we do. So go check it out. And thank you for being here. I appreciate that. I'm coming to you from a snowy western Wisconsin. And western Wisconsin, in case you just think, oh, it's all farm territory out there. Western Wisconsin, we're about, 25 minutes from the St. Paul, Minnesota area, the capital city of St. Paul, and another 15 minutes to get over to the downtown Minneapolis area. So we are really out here in western Wisconsin on the outer fringes. Even though we've crossed the state line, we're on the outer fringes of the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. But we are out in the rural part, a little rural town out here. It's bigger than a town. It's a rural city, but not quite a city either. We're kind of in the middle. So that's where we're broadcasting from. It's snowy. We had snow yesterday, which was very early in the season, even though up here, Minnesota, Wisconsin, notorious for having cold winters and snow. We don't usually have a lot of snow before November. Every now and then we get something on Halloween, the Halloween Day Blizzard back in 1991. I remember that. And then we also have, it can get cold up here, but we've had warm Decembers too. We're all the way up to Christmas. We don't have any snow. And we have green or greenish-brown Christmases. I prefer those. So it's cold here. We've started wearing our winter clothes and our winter coats because it's cold. It's in the 30s. It's not going to even get to 40 degrees Fahrenheit here today. But the sun is out. There's the upside. And we might get a little more snow over the next couple of days. So this might be with us to stay. Even though the forecast was supposed to go up into the 50s sometime in the next week, the long-term forecast, and now they've taken that off the long term. So it's cold, but I'm coming to you with warm heart, warm feet, somewhat warm hands. And that's all that's important, right? I can work up friction. There we go. All right, we're talking about Gilgamesh. I want to get right into Gilgamesh where we left off yesterday. Gilgamesh, of course, the ancient Mesopotamian king, who there has been a great epics written about him, great mythology about him, and of course he's inextricably linked to the flood stories as we find them in the book of Genesis, because Gilgamesh has his own flood story. And we're looking at the immortality that he's seeking. Remember, his friend Enkidu was created by the gods to be a wild man that Gilgamesh could fight with and adventure with to tame his wild side. And yet they became fast friends, and they adventured together. They were the stereotypical heroic adventurers as friends. And then Enkidu dies. He's died, and the gods decide that Enkidu had to die as a punishment for the friends' acts of hubris. And at first Enkidu curses his lot, but then he comes to accept the inevitable, and he falls sick, he languishes, and he dies. And Gilgamesh buries Enkidu, but is absolutely devastated by the death of his friend, both because of the grievous loss of him and because he now fears that he himself will someday die. And as I mentioned yesterday, are we not more impressed with our own mortality when we see the mortality of those who are closest to us? I know people that I know who I have loved and cared for who have died, who passed on earlier than I have, obviously, because I'm still here, but who have died before me. It leaves you with that hole, that gaping emotional hole, and that hole that says, I am much more impressed with the mortality of my life than I was yesterday before my friend died, or my loved one died, or so on. I have both my parents, but both my parents are getting up there too. My dad is 81 years old, and my mother is 78 years old. Now, both highly functioning. Now, I will say this, they've been divorced for about 58 years, and have never seen each other since. Just saying, my parents are both alive. They live separately. They were remarried. And my mom is a very youthful looking 78. She looks like the new 50. And she does her business, her karaoke business. She's out every night, running her business, singing, making friends, all of that stuff. My dad is still working in his shop. He's still very vital in all the things he does, driving his tractor, working on it, doing things. And now he's not a farmer when I say tractor. He has all kinds of projects he's working on. Very creative man. So all of these things to say, when we lose those types of people, we see the gaping hole of mortality in our lives. I haven't lost even my parents yet. I haven't lost a sibling. I've lost a couple of relatives, older relatives, but I've lost more friends than anybody else. And this is the position that Gilgamesh is left in. He's left questioning his mortality. And remember, we gave the little monologue that he gave in the story out of the cuneiform tablets, where Gilgamesh says, how can I keep silent? How can I stay quiet? My friend whom I loved has turned to clay. My friend Enkidu, whom I loved, has turned to clay. Shall I not be like him and also lie down, never to rise again through all eternity? And so Gilgamesh leaves Uruk, and he wanders throughout the world in search of immortality. And he enters into an almost psychotic state. First, he roams the steppe, where he strips off culture. He acts as if he himself were the wild man, like Enkidu. And like Enkidu before his acculturation by the prostitute. Then Gilgamesh leaves the natural world, thereby attempting to strip himself of his own humanity. And Gilgamesh's search for immortality ultimately leads him to Utnapishtim. And this is almost where we left off last night, who was known to have survived the Great Flood and was granted immortality by the gods. And Utnapishtim is referred to as the Mesopotamian Moses. I'm sorry, not Moses, Noah in the ark. He survived the Great Flood. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that Utnapishtim and Noah are the same historical character. And he tells of a worldwide deluge that destroyed all of humanity except for himself and his family. And on that unique occasion, human beings, Utnapishtim and his trying to say it twice even though you know how to say it, Utnapishtim, and his wife are the only humans. They're granted immortality by the gods and his family. This is an exception. Otherwise, everyone dies. Thus, immortality is not attainable even by Gilgamesh. And although the lesson, his own morality, is forced on him, Gilgamesh can't yet fully accept it, and he prepares to return to Uruk. Utnapishtim presents Gilgamesh with a parting gift, this magical plant that gets stolen while Gilgamesh is taking a bath in a pond, and a snake steals it, a serpent, and gains immortality. So Gilgamesh is denied immortality. He's not even spared the corrosive effects of old age. And he realizes that all of his suffering and toil have resulted in nothing more than a benefaction for the snake. And he laughs. And he sees himself for what he is, a human being. And this is where the first 11 tablets of the Gilgamesh epic end, with his return to Uruk. And as he approaches Uruk, he points out to the boatman the architectural wonders of the city that he had built. And this is signaling his acceptance of the real world and his return to civilization as Uruk's king. And that ends the 11-tablet standard Babylonian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, with this story in mind, we're going to be able to grasp how a great epic came together and then evolved over time. The early Sumerian stories of Gilgamesh center on themes of martial prowess or death, or both. And in these stories, Enkidu is Gilgamesh's servant. By the time of the Old Babylonian version, however, Enkidu has become Gilgamesh's friend. And in such ways, the composer of the Old Babylonian version created this brilliant new epic of connected episodes that was given unity by this new focus on themes of companionship, separation, death, the meaning of life. Things only hinted at in the Sumerian tales. So these two powerful emotions, loss and fear, loss of a friend and fear of one's own death, take over and animate the whole work all over again. And it's deeply moving, even today, to hear Gilgamesh's words from the 18th century BC Old Babylonian version. This version now today would be almost 4,000 years old. And this is what Gilgamesh had to say about Enkidu. And this is taken from the cuneiform texts. My friend, whom I loved so deeply, who went with me through every danger, Enkidu, whom I loved so deeply, who went with me through every danger. He went to the doom of mortal men, weeping over him day and night. I did not surrender his body for burial. Maybe my friend will rise at my cry. For 7 nights and 7 days, until a maggot dropped from his nostril. After he was gone, I did not find life, wandering like a trapper in the midst of the wild. And then from the standard Babylonian version, we have this segment. Oh, my friend, wild ass on the run, donkey of the uplands, panther of the wild. How would you like to be remembered by your friends as the wild ass on the run, the donkey of the uplands? Context, folks, context. He's the panther of the wild. My friend Enkidu, wild ass on the run, donkey of the uplands, panther of the wild, he repeats. Having joined forces, we climbed the mountains, seized and slew the bull of heaven, destroyed Humbaba, who dwelt in the forest of cedar. Now what is this sleep that has seized you? You've become unconscious. You do not hear me. But he lifted not his head. He felt his heart, but it beat no longer. He covered like a bride the face of his friend. Like an eagle he circled around him. Like a lioness deprived of her cubs, he paced to and fro, this way and that. His curly hair he tore out in clumps. He ripped off his finery. Like something taboo, he cast it away. And for his friend Enkidu, Gilgamesh did bitterly weep as he wandered the wild. I shall die, and I shall not then be as in, and shall I not then be as Enkidu? Sorrow has entered my heart. Now, the old Babylonian version begins with this paean to Gilgamesh, the warrior king, and it presumably ends with this description of the walls of Uruk, the 11th tablet standard Babylonian version, but not the 12th tablet version. Remember we mentioned that yesterday? There was a 12th tablet added later. However, both begins and ends with a description of the walls of Uruk, thus providing a distinctive narrative frame. And the framing of the tale also indicates a change from a work of oral literature to a work of written literature. And indeed, the standard Babylonians version expanded prologue contains 2 stanzas that explicitly direct our attention to a text written by Gilgamesh that served as the original basis of the epic. And that's in Tablet 1 of the standard Babylonian version, 5 through 8 and 23 through 27. So this framing device, literary framing device, where you come and you put bookends on something and tell what you're going to say in the middle, that's a literary device. So this framing bookended device clarifies this central theme of the epic. Civilization is the only form of immortality available to mortal men. You can see this played out in Egypt. Civilization, buildings, architecture. These are the only form of immortality for mortal men. And although both the 11 tablet version and the earlier old Babylonian version conclude with descriptions of the great city of Uruk, it means different things in each of them. In the 11 tablet version, as we've seen, Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, and he views the city walls after his encounter with Utnapishtim. And from Utnapishtim, Gilgamesh hears of the flood, a part of a longer account in which humanity is created and later decimated by plague, brought by the gods, drought, and finally the flood. And Gilgamesh learns all of this, from all of this, that he's going to find immortality not by living eternally, but by becoming part of and ensuring the health of civilized humanity. And thus he returns to Uruk and proudly surveys its walls. Gilgamesh, the king. And you can start to understand this, that even in this ancient text lies this morality play of understanding who and what you are, and how Gilgamesh attained this knowledge and this wisdom that he himself would be more immortal in what he leaves behind than he would be by living on forever. And so the precursor of the earlier old Babylonian version, on the other hand, doesn't contain the encounter with Utnapishtim. Instead, in the course of his wanderings after Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh encounters the goddess Siduri, who runs a tavern at the edge of the world. Ha ha! What a great name for a novel. Matt Finn, I'm going to address you directly here because we have kind of quipped about a graphic novel on this and characters. I could imagine the Gilgamesh epic, the whole epic graphic novel series being entitled The Tavern at the End of the World. Think about that for a second. So Gilgamesh, he encounters Siduri, who runs the tavern at the end of the world. She tells him that he cannot attain immortality and advises him to resume normal life. What great, at least for 4,000 years ago, great advice from your barkeep. And he can find meaning only in normal human activities. This is what Siduri says to Gilgamesh. Said the tavern keeper to him, to Gilgamesh, and this, by the way, this comes from the old Babylonian Sipar Tablet 3, verses 1 through 3. Said the tavern keeper to him, to Gilgamesh, O Gilgamesh, where are you wandering? The life that you seek, you will never find. When the gods created mankind, death they dispensed to mankind. Life they kept for themselves. But you, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full. Enjoy yourself always by day and by night. Make merry each day. Dance and play day and night. Let your clothes be clean. Let your head be washed. May you bathe in water. Gaze on the child who holds your hand. Let your wife enjoy your repeated embrace. So, just as a prostitute, a woman, humanizes and acculturates Enkidu from the wild man to the more human man at the beginning of the epic, so a tavern keeper, another woman, humanizes and acculturates Gilgamesh at the end of the old Babylonian version. And in all versions of the epic, women tend to represent the love and the beauty of this world, as opposed to the absolute commitment to the heroic ideal, which leads to death. So the male heroic ideal of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, that was something that always led to mortality, to death. But the women in the tales always represented the love and the beauty. And as we move from earlier to later versions, the meaning of one's commitment to this world changes. In the old Babylonian version, Gilgamesh returns to this world to seize the day and live a full life. In the 11-tablet version, Gilgamesh returns to this world to act as a responsible leader, to ensure the vitality of his city and civilization and the existence of mankind. And the latest version of the epic of Gilgamesh was created in the first millennium BCE by simply adding another tablet to the 11-tablet form of the tale. Tablet 12 is a translation of part of the Sumerian tale known as Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld. And it tells how Enkidu is seized by the Netherworld and loses his life. He then returns to Gilgamesh in the form of a shade and describes the fate of the various inhabitants of the Netherworld. The clear implication of this tablet is that Gilgamesh himself is going to die and will be defiled just like everyone else. And he'll become a god of the underworld. In the 12-tablet version, with the death of Enkidu, a form of heroism loses its meaning. Only immortality is an acceptable option. Gilgamesh must become either an immortal man or a god. But immortality is unattainable to men, for only gods are immortal. Therefore, Gilgamesh must become a god. And indeed, in ancient Mesopotamia ritual practice, Gilgamesh is the god of the Netherworld, or a god of the Netherworld. And before we go out to break, I'm going to end with this little snippet from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, supreme king, judge of the Anunnaki, deliberative prince of the peoples, who survives the regions of the world, bailiff of the underworld, lord of the peoples beneath. You're a judge and have vision like a god. You stand in the underworld and give the final verdict. Your judgment is not altered, nor is your utterance neglected. Your question you inquire, you give judgment. You watch and you put things right. Shamash has entrusted to you verdicts and decisions. In your presence, kings, regents, and princes bow down. You watch the omens about them and give the decision. And this is, of course, now this is a translation by Wilfrid Lambert, Gilgamesh in Religious, Historical, and Omen Texts. And the Historicity of Gilgamesh was his book, published in 1960. So we're going to go out to break now. We're going to end this first half. We'll come right back and we're going to pick up this story of Gilgamesh when we return. Sit tight.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're watching and listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio and all the different places and outlets where you can find the audio version of this show being broadcast. At the same time, come on over to my YouTube channel to find the video simulcast of this show and the live chat room with the fellow Intrepids talking it up right now over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, we left off with Gilgamesh, talking how the Gilgamesh epic is now in the 12-tablet version, setting up the death of Enkidu, a life of heroism that lost its meaning. Only immortality is the acceptable option. And it's setting up how Gilgamesh is the god of the netherworld. And then a brief snippet from the tablets that talk, the 12th tablet, that talk about who he is to become. Now, Gilgamesh's place in the netherworld in Mesopotamian religion required that he be a deity, which he was neither in the old Babylonian version or the 11-tablet version. And so a solution to this dilemma was provided by adding tablet 12 to the 11-tablet version. And even though it seems to contradict other parts of the story, the addition of tablet 12, much like the intersection of Utnapishtim story in the 11th tablet version, is a deliberate attempt to change the ultimate meaning of the work of Gilgamesh's epic. And here the themes that we find in all versions of the epic, loss, death, the longing for immortality, are resolved by Gilgamesh's implicit decision to accept his divine destiny. Now, this is rather like taking classic pieces of literature and later in time other authors adding their own versions of an ending or creating a new ending. It's like taking the Star Wars trilogy and adding 6 more movies. It creates an end that some other creative person has said this story needs. And so it's not that each version of the epic is a completely separate narrative. All 3 relate many of the main episodes that address most of the main themes. And even in the 2 earlier versions, for example, Gilgamesh has divine aspects. In the old Babylonian version, as king of Uruk, he participates in some form of the sacred marriage, and he has intercourse with the goddess Isul-Era, and in the guise of a human female, either a priestess or a new bride. And Gilgamesh is already part god and part man. He says, "Who is there that can rival his kingly standing and say like Gilgamesh, 'It is I am the king'?" And Gilgamesh was his name from the day he was born. So 2/3 of him God and 1/3 human. That's from the standard Babylonian Tablet 1 version of the story. Now, as the Gilgamesh epic evolved or simply changed over time as authors were adding to the story, different themes took the forefront and provided the principal crisis faced by the hero. In the old Babylonian version, the conflict involves a hero who must become a man. In the 11-tablet version, the hero must become the king. And in the 12-tablet version, the hero must become a god. So, man, king, and god. And the principal themes, respectively, are fame and the good life, the value of civilized life and kingship, and the meaning of death and divinity. In its essence, the literary genre that we call epic deals with a hero, a powerful hero, who shows his mettle in battle. And he's aggressive, he's courageous, he's even impetuous, and he shows a little concern for his own safety and focuses all his energy on combat, duty, honor, victory. Hero in battle, let me sing this song. Fair of limb, hero in battle, let me sing this song, declares one of the Sumerian tales of Gilgamesh. But great epics like Gilgamesh and the Iliad, whether oral or written, also introduce a note of tragedy. They view heroism not from the perspective of the battle itself, as if the battle were now taking place, but from the outside or after the battle. Not only do they recall the inevitable death of the courageous warrior in combat, but even more, they reflect upon the tensions between the values of power and war, on the one hand, and those of the orderly civilized life on the other hand. And they explore the inevitable conflicts that new circumstances create. These circumstances may just be that the hero returns to a peaceful occupation and pursues a normal life after his heroic events, or that the hero submits to the discipline of the state and becomes a king, serving his people, or that the hero pursues truth or immortality unto death. And the epic is often a meditation on and an exploration of conflicts generated by its own form of heroism. The Gilgamesh epic tells of courageous deeds, but it does so to highlight the pain that follows and the new problems that must be faced. Gilgamesh struggles against the world, and he's deeply committed to his own personal absolutes, as are the heroes of later Greek epics. But he also experiences moral growth. He learns, he changes, and finally he asserts the value of normal life and seeks to grasp it. As with Odysseus from the Iliad and the Odyssey, Gilgamesh's growth is symbolized by wanderings that both reflect and elicit the changes in him. His wanderings are the mechanism and the backdrop for change. The death of Enkidu is a catalyst for change. When the old Babylonian version made Enkidu into Gilgamesh's friend, the composer transformed disconnected heroic tales into the potential for an epic. It's an epic tale of growth, a potential more fully realized in the 11-tablet version than in the old Babylonian tale. In this epic tale, the hero discovers human suffering, human limitation, death, and meaning. And without Enkidu's death, there could be no development. And similarly, without the wandering, there could be no potential for development. That's interesting, isn't it? That how tragedy introduces the potential for growth in a different area. It's funny, I was watching earlier today, my wife and I like this little series called Schitt's Creek. It's SCHITT''S, Creek, a little town. And it's a show that was done by Eugene Levy. You might remember him from old, not Saturday Night Live, the Canadian, for Pete's sake, the Canadian version of that. It'll come to me in a second. And Eugene Levy and his son, Daniel Levy, who's a gay man. But the series isn't about a gay man. It's about this family. It's a family who is a wealthy family that loses everything. And they end up in this little town by their banker or their advisor to go. And they buy this motel in this little town. And it's run by, there's great comic geniuses in this series. And one of them being Chris Elliott, if you remember Chris Elliott. He's the mayor of, he plays Gordon Schitt, S-C-H-I-T-T. Schitt's Creek is the town. And it's a fantastic series. It ran for 6 seasons. And we just watched the last couple of episodes of season 6 tonight. And it's interesting how even a comedic series, which seemed very small, it seemed like nobody knows about this series, but it garnered a lot of fame. It garnered some Emmys over the years. But how this series, it didn't incorporate tragedy, but it incorporated real life into its characters. And that real life, I found myself at points in that series shedding a little tear because of, wow, that's gripping emotionally. Something I might not think that I would normally shed a tear over. And so this is literary vehicles that are used. They were used 4,000 years ago. They're used now. In as with Odysseus in the Iliad, as we mentioned, Gilgamesh, his growth is symbolized by wanderings that both reflect and elicit his changes. And his wanderings are the mechanism and the backdrop for his change. And without this wandering, without the pondering his immortality, or his mortality, and seeking immortality, there could be no potential for development. So, Schitt's Creek, I mentioned that series not because there's a direct link in, but it shows a literary way, a storytelling form of drawing you into the emotional impact of characters through different means. In the course of the Gilgamesh epic, we witness the transformation of Gilgamesh's heroic indifferences to death into an all-consuming knowledge of his mortality and dread of death. And this is one of the link-ins with the Schitt's Creek series, is that here are wealthy people who have no idea how to live the unwealthy life. And that's the comedic vehicle. Yet they all learn how much that lifestyle over the few years they were there changed their hearts and changed who they were and changed the object of their affections and their love and their attention. So Gilgamesh has to learn to live and to die. He has to find ways to express his tremendous energy and yet exist within the limits imposed on him by society and by the universe, the laws of the universe. The epic, however, stresses that despite our greatest achievements, we are powerless against death. So Gilgamesh must come to terms with his nature and learn to die. Isn't this what religion teaches us as well, which was the segue we used to get to Gilgamesh over the last week? Religion has to teach us how to live and how to die. No matter what our original concept or outlook of it is supposed to be. Despite all of our great achievements, all the things that we can wrangle in this life, all the glorious victories mixed in to the opposite of triumph, the failures. All of these things culminated are the things that show us that we live this life to achieve certain goals, and yet we are powerless against its most inevitable factor, and that is death. And so Gilgamesh has to come to terms with nature, with his nature, and he has to learn to die, which is what we need to do. And that brings in our religion. In all versions of the epic, Gilgamesh is presented to us, the readers, as an individual who lives on a heroic plane, and he exists in spiritual isolation. But such a life is unbearable, according to the Gilgamesh epic. Gilgamesh seeks immortality as a human being, and in all three versions of the text, he learns that this is an impossible thing to find and achieve. And in the old Babylonian version, now, by the way, that theme is old enough to us now after 4,000 years that it might not seem that revelatory to us. But imagine this being written down 4,000 years ago, and over the next millennium, how that story changed, how it had things added into it to learn from. In the old Babylonian version, Gilgamesh becomes a normal man who finds a meaningful context within the bosom of the family and creates children who represent him in the future. That's his immortality. In the 11-tablet version, he becomes a normal king who rules his community with wisdom and creates human cultural achievements that outlast his own reign and are passed down to future generations. In the 12-tablet version, he readies himself to become a normal god, if there is such a thing, who judges dead human beings for eternity. And when examining the three versions in turn, we're almost reminded of the stages of growth of all men and women. In youth, we're socialized and we learn to become functioning members of society. As adults, we take on positions of leadership, and finally, in old age, we confront the issues of death. And so in its own way, the Epic of Gilgamesh is this crazy you might not have ever seen it this way before, but this crazy meditation on fundamental issues of human experience. It grapples with the problems of an existential nature, the powerful human drive to achieve, the value of friendship, the experience of loss, the inevitability of death. And the story draws together the many strands that make up the identity of Gilgamesh, who represents the everyman. As heroic and kingly and godly a figure as he was the hero, he was the man, he was the king, and finally, the god. Now let me ask you too, when you hear the phrase, we're all gods, isn't this what we have also evolved to with our concept of death? We are all gods. We are all immortal because the life goes on after the physical death. There is something more. There is immortality. There is godhood in the sense that, isn't there a place biblically where it says even the believers who die and pass on, they will be part of judging the saints? We're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, we're told, in biblical New Testament text. And so, this is the story of Gilgamesh. He was the hero, the man, the king, and the god. The man who lived adventure and life to its fullest, then lost his best friend. Tragedy drove him to seek immortality and to question, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Do I have any control over that? To accepting the fact that he's human, he's a man, and he will die, to eventually being told he would be a god in the afterlife. So, there's fame here I want to mention and talk about. Gilgamesh is the hero versus Gilgamesh is the man. In the old Babylonian version of this Gilgamesh epic, this is the one written almost 4,000 years ago, 1800 BCE, Gilgamesh pursues valor and glory. He's larger than life. He's of heroic proportions. It says in the epic, in the old Babylonian version, surpassing all other kings, heroic in stature, brave scion of Uruk, wild bull on the rampage, going at the fore, he was the vanguard. Going at the rear, one of his comrades could trust. So Gilgamesh accepts the fact that he's going to die, but he sees fame as offering a kind of immortality. Who is there, my friend Enkidu, can climb to the sky? Gilgamesh says. Who is there that can climb to the sky? Only the gods dwell forever in the sunlight. As for man, his days are numbered. Whatever he may do, but it is but wind. And that's from the old Babylonian Yale tablet. Didn't Solomon, in his Ecclesiastes, say something very similar? Was he quoting Gilgamesh? As for man, his days are numbered. Whatever he may do is but wind. And if you look at, by the way, the words of Solomon in Ecclesiastes, let's see, days are numbered. I'm going to put this contextually in here so I can find this passage. Solomon said, the days of a man may be numbered, but the days of Israel are innumerable, he said. And all is like the wind, he said, it all perishes. Days of man are numbered, and they pass like the wind. And so we found even ancient men like Solomon, middle 900s BC, the 10th century BCE, quoting Gilgamesh from the 18th century BCE. So when Enkidu dies, however, the fear of death overwhelms Gilgamesh, and he goes on in search of immortality. He finally meets Siduri, the goddess who runs the tavern at the edge of the world. The tavern at the edge of the world. What a great name. I need to use that. Matt Finn and others, as I mentioned earlier, either in a graphic novel or for something, the tavern at the end of the world. Maybe I need to have a tavern. I need to build a pub. Finally, he meets Siduri, the goddess who runs the tavern at the edge of the world, who advises him to give up his futile quest and find meaning in everyday pleasures. She says, "Oh, Gilgamesh, where are you wandering? The life that you seek you will never find. When the gods created mankind, death they dispersed to mankind. Life they kept for themselves. But you, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full. Enjoy yourself always by day and by night. Make merry each day. Dance and play day and night." So this is the fame. This is Gilgamesh the hero versus Gilgamesh the man. Now, there's a making of the Gilgamesh epic, and it went this way, just so you're clear on this. The Sumerian version, which was the 3rd millennium BCE. And that's a series of disconnected tales about Gilgamesh. And the themes are heroism and death. Then you have the old Babylonian version, which is the 18th century BCE. And so you've got basically 30th century BCE with the 3rd millennium. But then you've got the 18th century and about 1700 BCE. A continuous narrative that recounts the adventure of Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu. Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh's wanderings, and the return to Uruk. And the whole theme of the old Babylonian version is fame. Gilgamesh as hero versus Gilgamesh as man. And the standard Babylonian, this is the 11 tablet version. This is the late 2nd millennium BCE, not long after the old Babylonian. It adds the encounter with Utnapishtim and the story of the Great Flood to the Old Babylonian version. And the theme is kingship, Gilgamesh's hero versus Gilgamesh's king. And then finally there's the standard Babylonian version, which is the 12th tablet version, the 12-tablet version. And this came out in the first millennium BC. And it adds a tablet to the 11-tablet version, describing Gilgamesh's preparations to die and become the god of the netherworld. And the theme is death and divinity, Gilgamesh's hero versus Gilgamesh's god. And so that leads us to look at a couple of last things here that I want to look at on Gilgamesh before we wrap up. His kingship, Gilgamesh is the hero versus Gilgamesh is king. And then his immortality, Gilgamesh is a hero versus Gilgamesh is a god. And the 11-tablet standard Babylonian version, the late 2nd millennium BC of the epic, emphasizes Gilgamesh's transition from this powerful but wild hero to a responsible king. And at the beginning of the epic, Gilgamesh's unrestrained energy threatens the people of Uruk. The young men of Uruk he harries without warrant. Gilgamesh lets no son go free to his father. By day and by night his tyranny grows harsher, and Gilgamesh, the guide of the teeming people. What are virtues in the heroic warrior, however, may well be faults in a ruler? The first lesson Gilgamesh must learn is that heroism will not make him immortal. He's taught by Utnapishtim, who tells him that the story of the Great Flood that destroyed humanity. Gilgamesh begins to reflect on the meaning of his life, as well as on forms of immortality. Said Gilgamesh to him, to Utnapishtim, the distant, I look at you, Utnapishtim. Your form is no different. You are just like me. You are not any different. You are just like me. How did you find eternal life? And then Gilgamesh realizes that his city Uruk will live on after he dies. His own immortality is thus bound up with the health and strength of the city he was born to rule. And he gives up his wanderings and returns to Uruk, where he marvels at the greatness of the city. He came a far road, was weary, found peace, and set all his labors on a tablet of stone. He built the rampart of the Uruk, the sheepfold, of holy Iana, the sacred storehouse. See its wall like a strand of wool. View its parapet that none could copy. Take the stairway of a bygone era. Draw near to Iana, the seat of Ishtar, the goddess, that no later king could ever copy. Climb Uruk's wall and walk back and forth. Survey its foundations. Examine the brickwork. Were its bricks not fired in an oven? Did the 7 sages not lay its foundations? And then finally the immortality, Gilgamesh's hero as God. And there's one last passage I'll read here and we're going to be done and out. And the latest version of the epic, the 12th tablet, prepares Gilgamesh for his death and his journey to the underworld, where he will pass judgment over the dead. And it says, O Gilgamesh, I made your destiny a destiny of kingship, but I did not make it a destiny of eternal life. For mankind, whatever life he has, be not sick at heart, be not in despair, be not heart-stricken. The bane of mankind is thus come. I have told you that what was fixed when your navel cord was cut is thus come. I have told you. The darkest day of mortal man has caught up with you. The solitary place of mortal man has caught up with you. The flood wave that cannot be breasted has caught up with you. The battle that cannot be fled has caught up with you. The combat that cannot be matched has caught up with you. The fight that shows no pity has caught up with you. Go ahead when the great Anuna gods sit down to the funerary banquet, to the place where your father is and your grandfathers, your mother, your sisters, your siblings, your precious friend Enkidu, your little brother, your friend Enkidu, the young man, your companion. There in the great city dwell governors and kings. Be not in despair, be not heart-stricken, for now you will number among the Anuna gods. You will be accounted one of the lesser gods. You will act as governor of the netherworld. You will pass judgment. You will render verdicts. What you say will be as weighty as the word of Ningishida and Dumuzi. From the great wild bull is lying down. Was that segment. And we're done. We're out of time, folks. That's Gilgamesh. We're going to be back tomorrow night with something that segues right off of this. And so be here tomorrow, 23-hour break. Have a good night. See you then.